For 20,000 years, the Jedi stood as the galaxy's guardians, the light in the darkness, the shield against chaos, and the voice of peace in a galaxy that never seemed to want it. But 20,000 years is a long time, long enough to forget why you started, to mistake service for control and peace for submission. And when you've been the light for that long, you stop seeing the shadows. This is the story of the Jedi Order, the beginning of the end, and the end of everything they stood for. The year was 36,453 BBY. There's no Republic, Empire, there's no Jedi Temple on Coruscant, none of that exists yet. Most of the galaxy, as we know it from the movies, hasn't even been drawn on a map. What you've got instead is a scattering of Force-sensitive people, living quiet little lives on different planets, completely unaware of each other, and then one day, all at once, they all feel one exact same thing. A call. Something tugging at them from somewhere they can't see. 8 massive pyramid ships, called Thoyor, descend on planets all over the galaxy, and they just start picking people up. So they go. Of course they go. Every kind of Force-sensitive being you can think of, packed into these 8 ships, all of them being pulled toward the exact same destination, even though none of them know where that destination is or why they're being summoned there. And where they end up is a planet called Tython, buried deep in what we now call the galaxy's deep core. This place is soaked in the Force. The Force is loud, it's active, and it reacts to what the people on it are feeling. Get too emotional, get too out of whack, and Tython itself throws a tantrum. Storms, the ground shakes, weather goes completely insane. This planet is a living mood ring for everyone standing on it, except instead of changing colour, it tries to kill you. So naturally, the first thing these pilgrims figure out is that they'd better get their act together fast, because their internal chaos has very real external consequences. And that's the seed of everything that follows. They name themselves the Jedi, a word that means mystic center. And trust me, that name is doing a lot of work, because centered is exactly what they're trying to be. Not leaning one way, not leaning the other. Dead center, holding steady, no matter what. Tython has 2 moons hanging in its sky. One moon is bright, glowing, practically radiant. They call it Ashla. The other is dark, shadowy. They call it Bogan. And the Jedi look up at these 2 moons every single night and think, that's basically the Force, isn't it? Light and dark, sitting right next to each other, neither one cancelling the other out, just coexisting. So that becomes their whole philosophy. Balance, not light good, dark bad, not pick a team and burn the other one down, just balance. These people aren't saying darkness is evil and must be destroyed. They're saying darkness is part of the equation, same as light. And your job as a person is to stand in the middle of both and not get yanked too far in either direction. If you do get yanked too far, if you tip into pure light obsession or pure dark obsession, they don't kick you out of the Order forever or throw you in a cell. They send you to meditate on the opposite moon until you find your footing again. Fall too far into the dark, off to Ashla you go to sit and stare at the light until you remember what it feels like. Fall too far into pure light, ignoring the shadow side of yourself completely, off to Bogan, same deal, opposite direction. These people built an entire religion, a whole society, around the very simple idea that the sweet spot is somewhere in the middle, and they took that idea dead seriously for 10,000 years. By around 36,019 BBY, roughly 4 centuries after that first wave of Thoyor landings, the Jedi aren't just pilgrims camping out under 2 strange moons anymore. They've started building something permanent. The first real academy goes up, a place called Padawan Kesh, run by a master named Nordia Gral, and that's where every single Force-sensitive kid on Tython starts their training from this point forward. Basics first, meditation, simple Force use, a bit of literacy and science thrown in too. And it's around this same time that Gral helps lock in a tradition that's going to define the entire Order for the next 10,000 years, the Great Journey. You train at Padawan Kesh as a kid, and once your masters think you're ready, you graduate from Padawan to something called a Journeyer, and then they send you out the door, alone, on foot, across an entire planet that is actively trying to kill anyone who loses their emotional balance. And each temple is wildly different. Akar Kesh, the Temple of Balance, sits on top of a massive stone monolith and is considered the most sacred site on the whole planet. Fitting, since balance is the entire point of being a Jedi at that time in the first place. Anil Kesh is the Temple of Science, where people are out here studying the actual mechanics of how the Force behaves. Ver Tepe is the forge, built right next to an active volcano, where Jedi are hammering out weapons and tools using literal molten rock as their workshop, which honestly sounds like the least relaxing job assignment in the entire Order. Stav Kesh, way up in a mountain range called the Ice Giants, is where you go to learn how to actually fight. Qigong Kesh is buried in a massive cavern in the middle of a desert, dedicated to pure Force ability. There's a temple for healing, one for the arts, and then there's Kalith, the Temple of Knowledge, which functions as the Order's library and its meeting hall, the place where the biggest decisions in Jedi history are going to get made down the line. So as a young journeyer, you don't just visit one of these places and call it a day. You're expected to travel between all 9 of them, spending weeks at each one learning under whoever the temple master is, picking up skills you never would have touched if you just stayed home at one academy your whole life. By the time you finish that whole trek, usually after a couple of years, you've earned the title of Ranger. And from there, if you keep growing, you can eventually become a master yourself. And that's a meaningful step because masters aren't only respected elders sitting around. At each temple, the master in charge gets a seat on something called the Council of Masters. 9 temples, 9 masters, 9 seats. That's the whole leadership structure of an organization that's about to span 10,000 years and shape the entire future of the galaxy. And it's just 9 people sitting in a room together, deciding things by group agreement instead of one person calling all the shots. The entire point of having 9 equal voices, one from each discipline, is to make sure no single perspective, too much focus on combat, too much focus on pure philosophy, too much of anything, gets to dominate the whole Order unchecked. It's balance, the same core idea that governs an individual Jedi relationship with the Force. 25,805 BBY. The Order already has been settled on Tython for over 10,000 years at this point, running their 9 temples, training generation after generation. But peace this long doesn't mean everybody outside the Order loves them. Quite the opposite, actually. See, over those 10,000 years, plenty of non-Force sensitive settlers had moved off Tython and spread out across the rest of the star system, building their own societies on other planets. And a lot of those people had grown up resenting the Order. Not hating them exactly, but viewing them as this distant, untouchable elite. A group that claims a special connection to the Force and uses that to throw its weight around the system without ever really answering to anybody. 10,000 years is a long time to let that kind of resentment simmer. And on a planet called Shikakwa, that resentment finds its spark. Shikakwa is run by something called the 9 Houses, basically feudal crime families, each controlling their own territory through fear and private armies. And out of that mess of competing crime barons rises a woman named Hadia, a Twi'lek with serious ambition and absolutely no patience for being told no. She starts uniting the 9 Houses under her own rule, crushing anybody who resists, and once Shikakwa is hers, she doesn't stop there. She sets her sights on the entire Tython system. The Jedi watch this happen and decide they can't just sit back and meditate about it. Hadia's conquest threatens the stability of the whole system, so the Order throws its support behind the aristocrats trying to resist her. At first, it's what people at the time started calling a phony war. Small skirmishes out in space, a few scuffles on some of the system's moons, nothing that feels like a real war yet. But Hadia's been quietly building an actual army the whole time, training it, arming it in secret, and when she's ready, she launches a full-scale invasion straight at Tython itself, going right for the heart of the Order. The Jedi get caught completely off guard. 10,000 years of peace will do that to you. They've never had to defend their home against an actual invading army before, and for a moment, it shows. But they adapt fast, because they have to. A master named Rajavari steps up and becomes the Order's first real wartime general, earning that exact nickname from the people fighting under him. And under his leadership, the Jedi start pushing back. This war gets ugly. Out on the planet Nox, entire domed cities pick sides, some backing the Jedi, some secretly arming Hadia's forces. When the Order discovers that a cluster of domes near a place called Greenwood Station has been smuggling weapons to the Despot army, they warn the residents. And then they bomb the domes. Thousands of civilians die. This is not the Order living up to its own ideals of balance and restraint. This is an institution at war, making the same brutal calculations any army has to make, and living with the consequences of it for years afterward. Greenwood Station retaliates by putting a literal bounty on Jedi lives, one assassination for every 100 civilians killed in the bombing, and those killings keep happening for years after the war technically ends. And the war's actual ending comes down to one man. A Jedi Ranger named Dagan Locke goes undercover, infiltrates Hadia's inner circle, and gets close enough to become not only one of her generals, but her lover. Hadia, by every account, finds him ruthless and impressive, has no idea who she's really sleeping next to. And when the war reaches its final battle at Caleth, the Temple of Knowledge itself, one of the most sacred sites the Jedi have, Locke strikes while Hadia is asleep. He kills her with the Force, ending the Despot Queen's reign in a single moment. 25,800 BBY. Dagan Locke gets promoted to Full Master after ending the war, celebrated everywhere, probably the most respected Jedi alive, and he decides to celebrate by being spectacularly reckless. He goes into the chasm. The chasm sits directly beneath Anil Kesh, a deep rift in Tython's surface that no sensor scan has ever fully mapped, and no droid sent to chart it has ever returned from. It's not secret, every Jedi on Tython knows it exists, but it's the kind of place where the knowing keeps most people at a respectful distance. The few who've explored it too deeply have come back broken, or not at all. There's something down there that reacts badly to whoever goes looking. Locke knows all of this. He's trained at Anil Kesh his entire career, has walked past the entrance to that rift more times than he can count. He goes anyway, pulling his friend Hawk Rio along with him. Deep in the chasm, he sees a vision. An army of dark warriors marching across a stretch of land called Skargora, every single one of them carrying blades made of frozen fire, hardened light that cuts through everything. At the head of the army, a figure with a single, glowing red eye. And woven into the same vision, Locke himself, leading the Jedi Order against this army the way he led them against Hadia, the war hero, again, in a war that hasn't happened yet. Hawk Rio sees something in the chasm too. He doesn't tell anyone what it is. Not yet. Locke comes out of that rift completely changed, fundamentally altered. He goes straight to the council and lays it all out. The council listens carefully, discusses it, and lands on the conclusion that the chasm got to him the way it gets to everyone who goes too deep. He's fallen out of balance, tipped toward darkness, seeing things that aren't there. They tell him to renounce the vision and return to center. He refuses. He knows what he saw, so they exile him to Bogan, the Dark Moon, same as they'd exile any Jedi who lost their footing. Meditate, recenter, come back when you're ready to let it go. He never lets it go. 25,793 BBY. 3 young journeyers are in the middle of completely ordinary training days when all 3 of them get struck at the exact same moment by the exact same vision. Shay Koda, a fighter who's been carrying the loss of both her parents since she was young, quietly and without complaint. Seknos Wrath, a Sith male, and not Sith as in the dark side order we know from the movies. A species, red-skinned, force-sensitive, inclined toward intensity. Tasha Rio, daughter of a temple master, one of the sharpest seers in the Order's younger generation. 3 completely different people, 3 completely different backgrounds, all pulled simultaneously toward the same location, like the Force decided to send them a group invitation. Out on Bogan, after 7 years of silence, Dagan Locke sees it too. A massive alien warship tears through Tython's atmosphere and crashes near a stretch of terrain called the Rift, an enormous ravine soaked in the dark side of the Force. The ship hits Tython like a hammer. The planet responds the only way it knows how. Earthquakes rolling across continents, weather systems spinning up out of nowhere, the world essentially short-circuiting from the sheer amount of sudden death and dark side energy concentrated in one place. The 3 journeyers reach the crash site first and find a single survivor fighting through force-induced hallucinations in the wreckage. He's carrying a weapon none of them have ever seen. A blade made of hardened light, frozen somehow into a solid form that cuts straight through their durasteel swords like they're made of clay. His name is Zesh. He's a Force Hound, a person bred and trained from early childhood by a civilization called the Rakatan Infinite Empire, an ancient, galaxy-spanning empire built almost entirely on the back of Force-sensitive labor and Force-sensitive conquest. The Rakata locate new worlds to conquer by sending Force hounds ahead of their fleets. People sensitive enough to track Force energy across hyperspace the way a hunting dog tracks a scent through a forest. Zesh is one of the best they have ever produced. Zesh isn't even a name anyone gave him with any warmth. It's a designation, carved into his skin in a language that isn't his. He didn't choose his purpose, his training, his loyalty, any of it. Every part of his existence was built for him by people who view him as a tool and a replaceable one. And he found Tython, the most force-rich planet in the deep core, hidden for 10,000 years, and he walked right to it. The only reason the Jedi are meeting him in a crash site instead of staring down a full invasion fleet is that the slaves aboard the Devourer sabotaged the ship before it arrived. Zesh is the lone survivor. The empire that sent him is very much still operational, and the moment they re-establish contact with him, they're coming. The journeyers eventually get through to him, helped by a small moment that nobody plans for. When a creature attacks them in the wreckage, Zesh, who has no framework for concepts like loyalty or sacrifice, who was raised to see every other being as either a target or an obstacle, turns back and helps them fight it off instead of using the distraction to escape. He can't explain why. Nobody built that reflex into him. It just surfaces, unbidden. The first small crack in someone constructed from the ground up to never have one. The council heals him up and makes a decision that probably looks strange. They try to help him find balance. Same process they'd apply to any Jedi who came in tilted too far toward the dark. Send him to Bogan, give him space to recenter, see what's actually in there once the training and the fear start to quiet down. Weeks after the crash, Zesh arrives on the Dark Moon, and the only other person on Bogan has been waiting 7 years for someone who carries a blade of fire to show up. Locke tests him first, drops in without warning, and hits him with a force-based mind trick, a pressure attack, checking what Zesh actually has under pressure. Zesh fights him off, gains the upper hand, and instead of pressing the advantage, listens to what Locke has to say. Locke disables his tracking manacles, takes him to a cave, shows him a downed ship from the Desperate War, still visible from where they're standing. And then he tells the story. The chasm. The 7 years of exile for refusing to pretend he didn't see it. Zesh confirms everything. All of it matches exactly what the Rakata are. Locke spent 7 years being called delusional for describing weapons that Zesh has been building his entire life. They escape Bogan together. Locke's plan is to manufacture more Force sabers and bring them back to the Council as hard physical evidence, make them look at the actual weapon from his vision, and try to keep calling him insane. They run across the Tython system, pursued by Jedi hunting parties, including Shae, who eventually catches up to them on Shikakwa. She doesn't beat Zesh through force, she just reminds him that choosing to help someone isn't the same thing as being commanded to, that there's a difference between loyalty and slavery, and he's allowed to know which one he's been living under. Zesh turns on Locke, the Jedi take them both. Locke gets sentenced back to Bogan. Before they drag him away, he looks at the Council and makes one statement. The army is coming. They will call him back when it arrives. 25,792 BBY. A year has passed since Zesh crashed onto Tython, and the Tython system doesn't look anything like it did before. The Rakatan Infinite Empire has been busy. A Predor, a Rakatan commander, named Scalnus, leads the invasion personally. Now, the Rakata wanted Tython for one reason. They were searching for the Prime Infinity Gate, an ancient Qua gateway buried beneath the planet that could give them control over the entire Infinity Gate network. Their forces have already hit Fury Station on the edges of the system, captured both gas giants, Obri and Maw, and though the Jedi managed to push them back from Tython itself in an early battle, the Rakata didn't retreat far. They took the forest world of Skargora and built their main command post there, exactly the place Dagan Locke saw in his vision at the chasm all those years ago. The planet covered in dark warriors carrying blades of fire. Standing in front of it now, there's not a lot of room left to argue the dude was hallucinating. The Jedi have made changes fast. They've allied themselves with the forces of the settled worlds, the other inhabited planets in the Tython system, and put Master Rajavari in command of the whole joint military operation. And the Order has done something that would have been unthinkable even a year earlier. They've started manufacturing Force sabers, dark side weapons Zesh brought with him, the weapons from Locke's vision, the weapons the Jedi have known for years draw their power entirely from the Bogan. They're building them now, arming themselves with them, because they've run the numbers and the alternative is losing. Seknos Wrath, one of the 3 journeyers who first found Zesh in the wreckage, hates this. He's disgusted watching his fellow Jedi embrace the dark side to survive, and he's not alone in that feeling. But the war doesn't care about philosophical discomfort. Neither do the Flesh Raiders, the mutated lower caste Rakata soldiers being thrown at Jedi positions across the system in wave after wave. Dagan Locke, meanwhile, has been released from Bogan. The council that exiled him twice for refusing to give up a vision that turned out to be completely accurate has recalled him to lead the Jedi in battle. The irony of that is not lost on him. He's sharp enough not to say it out loud constantly, but it's there, in every interaction he has with the Masters, who once dismissed him as broken. Locke and Zesh end up fighting side by side at Shikakwa, holding off Flesh Raiders in the swamps around Rio Fortress while Rakatan Annihilators close in. At one point, Zesh actually talks Locke into calling an airstrike on their own position to take out the Annihilators, the 2 of them, and whatever they feel for each other, standing in the blast radius together. They survive. A lot of other things don't. Trill, the other Force Hound, the one who posed as a ship thief and befriended Seknos during the Prisoner of Bogan arc, the one who'd been quietly feeding intelligence to Skelnus the entire time, springs her trap. She uses Zesh's psychic connection to Tasha Rio, one of the Jedi's most gifted seers, to blind her. And with Tasha blinded, the Jedi entire seer network collapses. These are the people who've been one step ahead of every Rakatan attack. Without them, the Jedi are suddenly operating blind, walking into engagements with no forewarning, and Skelnus knows it. Skelnus then captures both Zesh and Locke, interrogates Locke about the chasm, gets what he came for. Confirmation that the Prime Infinity Gate, the ancient Qua technology buried at the bottom of Tython's deepest rift, is real and accessible, and then uses Zesh's own memories and connections against the Jedi by reactivating old programming the Rakata planted in his mind years ago. Memory blocks. Zesh doesn't even know they're there until they're firing. He goes back to his masters. Rajivari tells the Jedi forces to retreat. Shakoda refuses to believe Zesh betrayed them on his own. The second battle of Tython begins with Skelnus hitting Tython's moon. Ashla first wiping out a strike force the Jedi had hidden there, and then bringing everything he has down to the planet itself. He descends into the chasm personally, dragging Zesh with him, hunting the Infinity Gate. Shakoda and Dagan Locke follow them down. What happens in the chasm is the turning point of the entire war, and it comes down to 2 very small moments. The first is Locke trying a mind twist on Skelnus, getting inside the Predor's head, the same technique he's used against enemies his whole career, and immediately being overwhelmed by the sheer volume of terror and agony in there. Every victim, every conquest, every life the Rakata's infinite empire has crushed and discarded, all of it hitting Locke at once. It takes him out of the fight. The second moment belongs to Shakoda. She tells Zesh she forgives him, unconditionally. Skelnus blasts her with Force lightning, telling Zesh that love is a lie, that loyalty is weakness, that the only thing that matters is power. Zesh, who spent his entire life being told exactly that, watches Skelnus hurt someone he loves for the crime of forgiving him, and makes a choice. He attacks Skelnus. A slave built from childhood to serve the infinite empire turns on his master in the middle of the master's greatest victory and just says no. The 2 of them duel at the bottom of the chasm, while above them, in the temple of Anil Kesh, Tasha Rio, blind, disconnected from the Force, barely functional after what Trill did to her, takes the Qua holocron down to the lowest level of the temple at Anang's instruction. Anang, the holocron's Qua gatekeeper, tells her that the coming of the Rakata has activated a failsafe. The only way to save Tython, to weaponize the original Tho-Yor ships against the Rakata fleet, is to have a Jedi Seer step into the pit of raw Force energy at the temple's core. It'll restore her sight and her connection to the Force. It'll also kill her. Ter Senden, standing next to her, tries to find another way. She doesn't give him the chance. She jumps, Her body dissolves into pure Force energy. Her sight comes back for exactly as long as it takes to do the thing she came there to do. Above Tython, the 8 original Thoyor pyramid ships, the same vessels that brought the Jedi founders to this world over 10,000 years ago, awaken and open fire on the Rakata fleet. Simultaneously, Zesh kills Skullanus in the chasm below. Without their Predor, without their fleet, the Rakata turn on each other and scatter. The invasion of the Tython system ends. The Jedi have won, Tasha Rio is dead, and the war has cost them more than any victory should. Now, after the battle, Dagon Locke walks up to the Jedi Council and tells them plainly, he and his followers are keeping their Force sabers. There are still flesh raiders loose in the wilderness, still real dangers out there, and he's not handing back his weapons or his power because the Council is suddenly comfortable enough to want things peaceful again. The Masters warn him that this attitude could send him back to Bogan. Locke looks at them and says he will never go back there. That refusal is the crack that opens everything. Because Locke isn't alone. He never was. He'd been gathering followers on Bogan and building influence during the war, and now that he's helped win that war, people are listening to him in ways they never did before. And the question he's been turning over since his days on the moon, the question that grew out of his chasm vision, and every year of exile, and every battle of the Rakatan War, is starting to sound like something more than personal grievance. What if the problem isn't which side you lean toward? What if the problem is the line itself? That's the thought that splits the ancient Jedi Order. Not Locke saying, darkness is good actually. It's something more subtle and more destabilizing than that. The idea that an order built on endlessly walking a tightrope between two extremes, never arriving anywhere, perpetually correcting course back to a center point that gives you no protection against an external threat, might be structurally broken. That the philosophy itself has a flaw it can't argue its way out of, and the Rakatan invasion just proved it. On the other side of that argument are the Jedi, who look at the same war and draw the opposite conclusion. That the problem wasn't balance, it was falling away from balance, and specifically toward darkness. That the Force sabers were a necessary evil that's now over, and keeping them is choosing to stay tilted when the crisis is done. The two sides don't sit down and debate this in a council chamber. Within a short time, former masters and students who trained side by side for years are organizing against each other. And when the fracture finally breaks into actual conflict, it takes a name from the war that caused it, the Force Wars. Former Jedi on one side, wielding the Ashlar, former Jedi on the other, wielding the Bogan. The first organized conflict in galactic history between the light side and the dark side of the Force, fought across the same continents they once crossed together on their great journeys, through the same forests and mountain ranges, where journeyers learned to find their balance for 10,000 uninterrupted years. Zesh, after killing Skullanus at the bottom of the chasm, declares himself Tau, his true name, essentially shedding the slave identity the Rakata gave him. After the war ends, the Jedi allow him back into the Order, and he and Shae Coda are seen exploring Tython together. That's where his confirmed story ends. Dagon Locke's story in Force Wars is left open, because the Dawn of the Jedi comic series was cancelled in 2015. We never got the Force Wars depicted in the comics. What we know about the Force Wars themselves comes mostly from the Old Republic game lore and the Jedi Wikipedia entries, which confirm the split happened, but Locke's specific fate during that conflict was never actually shown on the page. Now Rajavari, the general who commanded the Joint Jedi and settled world's forces against the Rakata. He's the person who organised the military response that kept Tython alive. When Zesh first crashed, when Tasha Rio first brought news of the skull from the Devourer, it was Rajavari who said, "Where there is one warrior, an army may follow," when nobody else was listening. He's respected, experienced, charismatic in the specific way that makes people follow someone not out of fear, but out of genuine belief. He sits with Garon Jard, Calla Bryn and Ter Senden as one of the 4 people forming the nucleus of what is now calling itself the Jedi Order, the first informal High Council, meeting in week-long gatherings on Tython to figure out what this new organisation believes, what it stands for, how it differs from the first Jedi it grew out of. And then he defects, falls to the dark side, takes a faction of followers with him and forms something called the True Dark Sons of Tython, a group whose principles run directly counter to everything the young Jedi Order is trying to build. He seizes Calith, the Temple of Knowledge, the same temple that survived Hadia's siege and that hosted the Order's most important decisions for 10 millennia, and fortifies it. The Jedi attack. The siege of Calith is ugly and sustained, Rajavari's followers fighting with the particular ferocity of people who've decided this is the hill they're dying on. And they're right about the dying part. Every one of Rajavari's true dark sons fights to the death rather than surrender. Rajavari himself falls during the siege, defeated by the Order he helped create, and whatever survives of the Bogan faction after that is scattered and leaderless. 25,783 BBY. The Force Wars are over. A decade of fighting, a decade of dark side weapons, used at scale across a planet that physically responds to force imbalance. And Tython has had enough. The biosphere has been collapsing for years by this point. The force storms have stopped being occasional disasters and started being the permanent weather. The ecosystem is gone. The air is going. Tython is no longer somewhere anyone can breathe. The survivors pack everything they can carry. Every scripture, scroll, every teaching hologram, every piece of accumulated wisdom from 10,000 years on this planet. Garanjard, Calabrin, and Ter Senden oversee all of it getting loaded onto ships. And then they go. Out of the deep core, through wild space, looking for something that doesn't know, yet it's about to have its name changed. They find it. A world as green and temperate as Tython was before the wars. They land and call it Ossus. On Ossus, 3 founding masters set down the actual bones of what the Jedi Order believes. And the core of it, the thing that separates everything that follows from and everything that came before, is this. Darkness is not a force to be balanced against the light anymore. It's not the necessary counterweight the Jedi spent 10,000 years managing. It's not Bogan sitting across from Ashla in a healthy equilibrium of competing truths. It's something to be refused, completely. A Jedi doesn't walk the line between 2 moons. A Jedi chooses one moon and stays there. Garanjard wants protection without fighting at the core of it. Serenity. Peace sought before violence. Ter Senden wants knowledge, the sharing of understanding across cultures, the dispersal of ignorance. Calabrin shapes the protective role. Jedi as guardians of those who can't protect themselves. That decision, made by 3 survivors on a new planet, grieving a dead world, is the decision that everything else in the next 25,000 years of galactic history flows out of. Every Jedi you've ever seen in a film, every teaching about fear leading to anger, and anger leading to hate, every warning about attachment and passion, and giving yourself over to emotion, all of it traces directly back to this moment, this choice, this planet. 3 masters, 1 new world, 1 enormous rejection of half of what their founders believed. Now the real Jedi Order is born. At this point, there's a tiny, fragile little political alliance starting to form among some of the nearby star systems. Basically, a few worlds deciding they'd rather cooperate than fight each other over trade routes and borders. This is the seed of what eventually becomes the Galactic Republic. And the Jedi? They want nothing to do with it. They're not protecting it. They're barely acknowledging it exists. But right now, in this moment, the 2 institutions that will eventually define the galaxy for the next 25,000 years are basically strangers living in the same neighborhood. So what does the Jedi Order actually do with itself on Ossus? Mostly, it grows slowly and quietly, lightsaber technology. It's not the sleek, reliable weapon you picture from the movies yet. These early blades are temperamental, sometimes dangerous to their own wielder. But the groundwork is being laid, and thousands of years pass like this. The scale is crazy actually, because scripts about ancient history tend to blur it into a long time ago and move on, and that does this story a disservice. We're talking about a stretch of time longer than the gap between the invention of writing and right now, today, you watching this video. The Order absorbs other Force traditions. It encounters. It earns a reputation. People start to respect it, even fear it a little. Meanwhile, that fragile little alliance of systems keeps growing too, expanding outward, pulling in more worlds, becoming the thing that will one day need the Jedi far more than it does right now. For a long stretch, this is peace. Genuine, boring, functional peace. And I mean that as a compliment. Boring peace is the kind civilizations actually want, even if it doesn't make for great documentary footage. But peace like that has a shelf life, and around 7000 BBY, the cracks start showing. Inside the Jedi Order, there's a faction, a group of Jedi, who've started asking a question the rest of the Order really does not want asked out loud. What if restraint is holding us back? What if all this meditation, all this careful suppression of emotion, all this stay calm, stay centered doctrine isn't unlocking the Force's real potential? What if the deeper power is on the other side of the fence in the stuff they've spent generations being told to avoid? The most prominent name tied to this group is Ajunta Pal. They begin using the dark side to literally reshape living things, bending biology itself, warping creatures into new forms. Some accounts even suggest they were chasing something bigger than that, pushing toward the idea of cheating death entirely. Whether or not they actually got close, the ambition alone tells you everything about how far past the guardrails they'd already gone. You can imagine how that lands with the Jedi Council. This isn't a minor doctrinal disagreement you hash out over tea. This is a group of their own members treating the dark side like a tool set instead of a threat, and doing it in secret for who knows how long before anyone catches on. When it comes to light, the Council doesn't hesitate. They shut it down completely. Paul and his people go to make their case, try to get the Order to at least tolerate what they're doing, and they get turned away, flat out. Getting rejected by the people who raised you, trained you, and shaped your entire worldview does something to a person. Multiply that across an entire faction of them, and you don't get quiet acceptance. You get resentment that has 3 years to sit and compound. Historians actually mark that 3-year gap specifically. This is called the Second Great Schism, the formal break, and it takes 3 more years after that before the resentment boils over into open war. This isn't even the first time the Jedi turn on their own, by the way. Centuries after Ossus is founded, around 24,500 BBY, a Jedi Knight named Zendor breaks away, convinced that real power comes through emotion, not detachment. He gathers followers, calls them the Legions of Leto, and fights the Jedi Order for control. It ends at the Battle of Columbus, where Zendor is killed. His partner, Arden Lyn, survives the war and ends up sealed away in a dark side stasis that keeps her alive for literally thousands of years afterward. The 100-year darkness begins. The earliest duels of the war are brutal and short, and the casualty rate in those first years is ugly, because everyone's fighting with techniques built for deflecting blaster bolts or facing down opponents with vibroblades, not for parrying another plasma blade capable of cutting through basically anything. Their existing form, Shicho, just wasn't built for this. It's simple kind of raw, great for a beginner or for disarming an opponent. Completely inadequate for a sustained lightsaber duel where one mistake means you're missing a limb, or worse. So both sides adapt, because that's what happens in a war. You either evolve or you die, and there's no in between. Out of the wreckage of the early 100-year darkness comes Form 2, Makashi. It's precise, economical, almost elegant compared to what came before. If you've ever watched Count Dooku fight in the prequels and thought, why does this guy duel like he's dancing instead of swinging a sword? That's Makashi, and its roots trace straight back to this war, and it does last close to a century. 95 years of a war that never fully stops, just ebbs and flares depending on where you are in the galaxy. Neither side wins clean or fast until 6,900 BBY, when it finally breaks at the Battle of Corbus. The Dark Jedi lose, decisively enough that there's no coming back from it as an organized force in Republic space. And the Jedi Order, showing a level of mercy that honestly surprises me a little, given everything that just happened, doesn't execute the surviving leadership. They exile them. 12 of them, the ringleaders, get loaded onto an unarmed ship and sent off beyond known space, beyond the mapped edges of the galaxy, with basically no way back and no weapons if they run into trouble out there. Ajunta Pal's on that ship. So is a woman named Sorza Sin, a commander named Zosan, an admiral named Remulus Draper, and a man named Karnes Muir, who's going to become relevant again much later in this timeline if you stick around. The thing about exile, though, it's supposed to be a punishment, a way to remove a threat without the guilt of killing them outright. And for a while, it looks like that's exactly what it is. These 12 adrift in unmapped space with no fleet, no home, no allies. But then they find Korriban. Korriban is already inhabited by a species of red-skinned, dark side-attuned humanoids the locals just call the Sith. These aren't Jedi, they're not from anywhere near Republic space. They're a native people who happen to have a natural connection to the dark side baked into who they are. And when 12 exhausted, defeated dark Jedi show up wielding lightsabers and force powers this species has never seen before, the locals see gods. The Sith name them Gen Jedi, Dark Jedi, in their own language. And it doesn't take long for a Junta Pal to go from impressive newcomer to outright ruler. He kills the reigning Sith king and takes the throne himself, becoming the first Dark Lord of the Sith. Over time, the exiles and the native Sith population start intermarrying, blending bloodlines through generations until eventually Sith stops meaning a species and starts meaning something else. A philosophy, an order, a way of using the Force that will outlive every single person involved in founding it by thousands of years. The Jedi Order thinks they solved the problem. War's over, threat exiled, records updated, back to business on Ossus. But what actually happened is they took 12 of the most dangerous dark side practitioners the galaxy had ever produced and handed them an entire civilization to rule, completely unsupervised, somewhere the Republic can't see and doesn't even know to look. It's going to take almost 2,000 years before anyone in Republic space even remembers the Sith existed at all. 2 millennia of the galaxy. Assuming that chapters closed for good, while out past the frontier, something is very much not finished growing. 6,900 to 5,000 BBY. The exiles who conquered Korriban blend into the native Sith population, and slowly the word Sith stops meaning a species and starts meaning an empire built on sorcery, on alchemy that reshapes living creatures, on a hierarchy of dark lords who claw their way to the top and usually don't die of old age once they get there. On the Jedi side, the Order spends those same centuries becoming exactly what the fledgling Republic needs it to be, not warrior monks anymore, but the closest thing the galaxy has to a police force, a diplomatic corps, and a court of last resort, all wrapped into one robe. The Republic keeps growing. It keeps leaning on the Jedi to hold together its expanding, messy, multi-species mess of a government. That silence breaks in 5,000 BBY, and it breaks because of 2 idiots with a spaceship. I say that with love. Gav and Jory Darrigan, siblings running a hyperspace exploration business, testing out an unmapped route, hoping to find a shortcut nobody's charted yet, so they can sell it and pay off their debts. Instead, they drop out of hyperspace at the worst possible coordinates in the galaxy. Korriban, capital of an empire the Republic doesn't know exists anymore, and their timing is somehow even worse than their navigation. They arrive at the exact moment the reigning Dark Lord of the Sith, a guy named Marka Ragnos, drops dead, leaving a power vacuum that 2 rival Sith Lords have been circling for years. One of them is Ludo Kresh, a conservative type who thinks the Sith should stay hidden and consolidate. The other is Naga Sadow, who thinks hiding is a waste of an empire this powerful, and who's about to get handed the single greatest excuse for expansion that any ambitious dictator could ask for. Outsiders, right here, right now, proof that the wider galaxy is still out there, waiting to be conquered. Sadow captures the Darragans. Jory gets shipped off to the icy Sith world of Zeost for interrogation. Gav gets something worse and more interesting. Sadow turns him, makes him an apprentice, feeds him just enough power and just enough flattery to make him useful, and then uses him as a tool to help launch a full invasion of the Republic. Sadow makes a full, multi-pronged assault, striking at the Koros system, and more importantly, straight at the heart of the Republic itself, Coruscant. Sadow doesn't personally lead the charge into battle. He sits back in something called a meditation sphere, and uses the Force to project illusions that make his invasion fleet look several times larger and more terrifying than it actually is. The Republic and the Jedi at Coruscant are staring down what looks like an overwhelming armada, and for a while it works exactly the way Sadow wants it to. But this is also where the war turns, and it turns because Sadow made one mistake. He trusted Gav Darrigan. Gav, watching what he's helped unleash, turns coat and attacks Sado's meditation sphere directly, shattering his concentration. The illusions collapse. The Republic and Jedi forces at Coruscant realize the army in front of them is smaller and weaker than it looked, and the momentum flips almost instantly. What was shaping up to be a real conquest of the Republic's capital turns into a rout. Sado retreats back towards Sith space, and if you're picturing him limping home to lick his wounds in peace, that's not what's waiting for him. Ludo Kresh, his rival, the one he thought he'd sidelined, is alive and has built his own fleet, ready to finish what the succession crisis started. The two of them tear into each other in a battle above Korriban itself, brutal and personal, and Sado wins it. Kresh dies, but there's no time to celebrate because a third fleet drops out of hyperspace almost immediately after. Republic forces under Empress Teta, who've tracked the war back to its source and arrived to finish the job. Sado has nothing left to fight with. He makes a last, desperate escape through the Denari Nova, a binary star system dangerous enough that pursuing him through it is its own kind of suicide mission, and it works. He gets away, barely, with a handful of ships and whatever Massassi warriors he can bring with him. The Massassi, by the way, are descendants of that original red-skinned Sith species from centuries earlier, the same one the exiled Dark Jedi conquered back at the start of all this. Sado drags a small population of them with him into exile. He ends up on a remote jungle moon nobody's ever heard of, Yavin 4, and instead of trying to rebuild an empire from nothing with the scraps he has left, Sado makes a different choice. He has his Massassi construct temples. He spends years there practicing alchemy, twisting the Massassi themselves into something new and monstrous through the same dark side experiments the earliest Sith exiles pioneered on Korriban. And then, when he's satisfied he's done what he can, he puts himself into suspended animation, sealed away, waiting. That bet actually pays off centuries later, but that's a story for the next time. Back in Republic space, the war is over, and on paper, the good guys won. Sado's gone. The immediate invasion is crushed. The Republic even sends forces to bomb Korriban itself, destroying huge amounts of Sith history and burying old tombs that won't be found again for thousands of years. It looks from the outside like a clean, decisive victory. It isn't one, not really, because the Sith Empire that Sado ruled doesn't actually die here, it scatters. A wave of survivors flee deep into the unknown regions, led by a Sith Lord named Vitiate, wandering for nearly 20 years, before they find an unclaimed world to call home and quietly start rebuilding, completely off the Republic's radar. The war the Republic just fought and won is, from a certain angle, just the first crack in a much longer story. Proof that this enemy doesn't go away just because you beat their army once. You can win the battle at Coruscant and still lose the bigger, slower war happening somewhere you can't see. For now though, the Republic doesn't know any of that. All it knows is that it just survived contact with an enemy it had forgotten was real. An enemy that came within a hair of conquering its own capital. Around 3998 BBY, roughly 1,000 years after the Great Hyperspace War, the Jedi Order flourished. It expanded across the Republic, established a permanent enclave on Coruscant, and trained generations of Jedi from its great academy on Ossus, where the Order's knowledge and traditions continued to grow. Ancient Sith knowledge was locked away, forbidden worlds were quarantined, and each new generation of Jedi was taught that some doors were simply never meant to be opened. A Jedi Knight named Exar Kun runs out of patience with his own restraint. His master, a respected old historian named Vodo Siosk Bas, won't teach him anything about the dark side, won't even let him near it. And for most students, that would be the end of it. Not for Kun. His curiosity turns into obsession, and eventually into something he can't put back in the box. He leaves his master behind, chases old rumours to the planet Onderon, and finds the tomb of a long-dead Sith Lord named Freeden Nad. Nad's spirit is still there, waiting, and it walks Kun first to Korriban, the ancient graveyard world of the Sith, and then out to the jungle moon of Yavin 4. Nad isn't looking for an ally, he's looking for a spare body. His plan the entire time is to get Kun corrupted and weakened enough that he can slip into Kun's flesh and walk around again, centuries after his own death. Kun figures out the con just in time. Instead of handing himself over, He turns his new dark side power back on Nad and destroys him outright. So the very first real act of Exar Kun, Fallen Jedi, is refusing to be somebody else's puppet. Worth remembering, because it's going to come back around on him later in a different shape. With Nad gone, Kun turns his attention to the native Massassi on Yavin 4 and enslaves them, using Naga Sado's abandoned ruins as the foundation for something new. He's not building a kingdom yet, he's building a base. Meanwhile, somewhere completely separate from all of this, a different Jedi is falling for an entirely different reason. Ulic Qel-Droma's master is killed by a dark side cult called the Krath, operating out of the Empress Teta system, and Ulic volunteers for the obvious terrible idea. Go undercover, infiltrate them, take them apart from the inside. If you've ever wondered whether grief makes for good tactical judgment, here's your answer. Ulic gets in, and the same rage and loss that sent him there in the first place ends up being exactly what the Krath use to pull him toward the dark side himself. He doesn't get tricked into it so much as he walks in already, carrying the thing that was going to break him. Exar Kun and Ulic collide. Kun's been hunting down everyone connected to Freed and Nad's old network, trying to eliminate rivals before they can challenge him. And Ulic, now tangled up with the Krath, counts as one of those rivals. They find each other on the planet Sinagar and duel, two of the best swordsmen currently alive, and neither one can land the finishing blow. And then, the fight just stops on its own, because both of them happen to be wearing ancient Sith amulets, and those amulets start glowing and reaching toward each other. Out of that light steps the spirit of Marka Ragnos, a Dark Lord who's been dead since right around the time of the Great Hyperspace War, 1,000 years earlier. Ragnos doesn't seduce anybody here. Both of them are already fallen by the time he shows. He just looks at what's standing in front of him and makes a decree. Kun is the new Dark Lord of the Sith. Ulic is his apprentice. Two people who were strangers an hour ago, now bound together by the ambitions of a corpse. From there, the war splits into two very different fronts, which is a big part of why the Republic has such a hard time getting a handle on it. Kun goes quiet and internal. He infiltrates the Jedi's own academy on Ossus, kills the librarian Odan-Ur, steals a Sith holocron, and uses it to corrupt a group of young Jedi apprentices into what becomes known as the Brotherhood of the Sith. He's hollowing out the Jedi Order from inside its own walls, turning its own students into weapons against their masters. Ulic goes loud. He strikes Republic worlds directly and pulls off something unnerving in the process. He challenges the reigning Mandalore to a personal duel with the entire Mandalorian army as the stakes. He wins. A fallen Jedi has an actual military behind him, one of the most feared fighting forces in the galaxy, fully loyal, fully weaponized. Between Kun working in the shadows and Ulic hitting targets in the open, the Republic doesn't know which fire to put out first, and Ossus pays the worst price of the whole war. Kun engineers a supernova, specifically to wipe the planet out, and while the Jedi are scrambling through a chaotic evacuation, he and Ulic land and ransack the Great Jedi Library, the same institution founded 1,000 years earlier by the last survivors of Tython, the place that held every scripture they managed to carry off a dying world. One stubborn tree-shaped Jedi Master named Ood Banar plants himself on top of a vault of relics and simply will not move, no matter what Kun throws at him. But the damage to Ossus itself is done, and it lands harder than any military defeat, because of exactly what that planet is supposed to mean. It's during that raid that Ulic's story turns for good. He ends up fighting his own brother, Kay, who spent the entire war trying to talk him back to the light. In a flash of blind fury, Ulic kills him. And the second it happens, watching what he's done with his own hands, something in him breaks completely. He surrenders himself to Nomi Sunrider, his former lover, still a Jedi, and asks her to sever his connection to the Force. He gives up the one thing that has defined every part of his life, because he's decided he can't be trusted with it anymore. That's the redemption, and notice what it costs. Everything a Jedi actually is. Broken and powerless, Ulic leads the Republic fleet to Yavin 4 himself, guiding them straight to Kun's stronghold. Kun, cornered with no path to victory left, doesn't go quietly. He performs one final dark side ritual, draining the life out of his own Massassi followers in a desperate attempt to tear his spirit free of his body entirely. It half works. His body is destroyed in the process. His spirit doesn't die with it. It gets trapped inside the temple on Yavin 4 instead, gone from the war, but not actually finished. Roughly 3976 BBY. The destruction of Ossus during the Great Sith War forced the Jedi Order to abandon the world that had served as its heart for thousands of years. In its place, the Order established the Jedi Temple on Coruscant as its new headquarters, placing itself at the political centre of the Republic. A new threat starts pressing on the Republic's edges. The Mandalorians, the same warrior culture that once fought alongside Hulik Kel Droma, have reorganised under a new leader who calls himself Mandalore the Ultimate, and they're expanding fast, hitting Republic worlds on the Outer Rim one after another. And the thing that makes this different from every crisis we've covered so far, the Jedi Council looks at this war and decides, deliberately, not to get involved. The Council refuses to help, and picture a bunch of detached bureaucrats shrugging off a crisis. That's not quite what's happening. The Council actually suspects there's something bigger lurking behind the Mandalorian aggression, some influence they can't see yet, and their instinct is to hold back, gather more information, avoid making a bad situation worse by rushing in blind. It's a cautious, defensible position from people who've spent centuries watching wars spiral out of control. It's also, as it turns out, exactly the wrong call, because caution doesn't do a single thing to stop the systems currently being burned off the map while the Council deliberates. Not every Jedi agrees with holding the line, and one of them, in particular, refuses to sit still for it. His name is Revan, a statement of intent, and he starts pulling together a movement of like-minded Jedi who call themselves the Revanchists. His closest friend, a Jedi Knight named Alec, is right there with him from the start. You'll know Alec better by the name he takes later, Malak. Together, in direct defiance of a Council order to stand down, they head to the front lines and start fighting a war their own order officially wants no part of. And Revan turns out to be terrifyingly good at it. He was brilliant. He starts winning battles the Republic's regular military can't win on its own, reclaiming territory, turning the tide on a war that had been going nowhere but backward. It happens fast enough and decisively enough that by 3962 BBY, the Republic's own Chancellor formally appoints him Supreme Commander of the entire military. A Jedi the Council explicitly told to stand down is now, a few years later, running the whole war effort with the Republic's official blessing. The Council didn't change its mind. Reality just walked past it. For years, this looks like the best version of the story you could ask for. Idealistic Jedi defies cautious elders, saves the galaxy anyway, gets vindicated. Except war doesn't reward idealism forever, and something in Revan starts shifting the longer this drags on. Victory after victory cost him pieces of the person he was when he started. He gets colder, more calculating, more willing to accept casualties and compromises that the Jedi, who first picked up a lightsaber for this cause, would never have stomached. Warfare has a way of doing that to people, and it's happening to Revan in slow motion, mostly invisible to everyone watching him win. It all comes to a head at Malachor 5 in 3960 BBY, in the war's final confrontation. Revan personally corners Mandalore the Ultimate aboard his own flagship and beats him in single combat. But the duel isn't actually the part of this battle that echoes through galactic history. That's the mass shadow generator. It's a super weapon, built specifically for this moment, and what it does is horrifying in its efficiency. It generates a gravity well massive enough to drag ships out of orbit and crush them straight into the planet's surface. And Revan uses it on the entire battle, Mandalorian and Republic fleets both, all at once, no exceptions. Thousands of his own soldiers, his own fellow Jedi, die in that gravity well right alongside the enemy he came there to defeat. It ends the war permanently. No Mandalorian remnant survives intact enough to regroup and come back for round 2. But it's the kind of victory that only makes sense if you've already stopped drawing a hard line between acceptable losses and atrocity. One of the Jedi present, a general named Mitra Surik, is close enough to the devastation that the sheer weight of that many deaths hitting the Force at once nearly kills her outright. She survives only by instinctively cutting herself off from the Force entirely, deafening herself to it just to endure the shockwave. Mandalore the Ultimate dying at Revan's feet after their duel, tells Revan something that clearly costs him to admit. He didn't start this war purely on his own initiative. He was guided into it, manipulated, pushed by a mysterious figure identified as a Sith agent. Someone who wanted this exact war to happen for reasons of their own. A dying enemy handing you a loose thread like that is not something a mind like Revan's just lets go. So, instead of coming home as heroes, which by every metric the galaxy can see they are, Revan and Malak turn and follow that thread outward, into the unknown regions, chasing down whatever's actually been pulling strings behind a war that just cost tens of thousands of lives and cracked open something in both of them that peace was never going to heal. What they find out there is a fully intact Sith Empire, ruled by a Sith Emperor nobody in Republic space has ever heard of. An empire that's been quietly rebuilding in total secrecy for 2,000 years, ever since the days of the Great Hyperspace War. They go in intending to cut the head off that threat before it can become the galaxy's next disaster. Instead, the Emperor overwhelms them and turns them to serve him. Two of the Republic's greatest heroes, the men who won an impossible war and became living legends doing it, disappear into enemy territory and don't come back as themselves. 3,959 BBY, about a year after Malachor ends the Mandalorian Wars, Revan and Malak come home, and for a moment it looks like the story everyone wanted. Two Jedi heroes back from the frontier, mission accomplished. Except they're not who they were when they left, and neither are most of the Jedi who followed them out there. Over that year, nearly every surviving revanchist falls to the dark side alongside them, and when they resurface, it's not as returning war heroes, it's as the new leadership of a Sith Empire nobody in Republic space even knew still existed, and they don't come back empty-handed. Out in the unknown regions, under the Sith Emperor's direction, Revan and Malak found something called the Star Forge, an ancient space station built by the long-dead Rakatan Infinite Empire, the same civilization that once bred force hounds like Zesh to hunt down worlds like Tython. The Star Forge can manufacture warships and droid armies practically without limit, drawing power straight from a nearby star. Revan and Malak actually managed to break free of the Emperor's direct control at some point during all this. They're still fully committed to the dark side, just not his puppets anymore, and they take the Star Forge for themselves. Then they turn around, go back to the armies that once followed them against the Mandalorians, and declare war on the Republic and the Jedi Order both. The Jedi don't have to build defenses against some ancient adversary or a returning exile from millennia ago. Their greatest living heroes are the threat. Jedi who trained side by side, fought the Mandalorians together, celebrated the same victories together, are now on opposite sides of lightsabers, and a good number of them are dying at the hands of people they used to call friends. That's a fundamentally different kind of war than anything the Order has faced since Exar Kun and Olik Keldroma, and it happens fast enough and hits close enough to home that there's no time to process it as anything other than a full-blown crisis for the Order's survival. The war grinds on for a few years, Republic and Loyalist Jedi against Revan's Sith Empire, until it finally turns on an act of betrayal that has nothing to do with the Jedi at all. A young Jedi named Bastila Shan, gifted with a rare ability called Battle Meditation that can shift the momentum of entire fleet battles just through her presence, leads a strike team aboard Revan's flagship in a desperate boarding action. And in the chaos of that fight, Malak makes his move. He's spent the whole war as Revan's apprentice, technically second in command, and he decides that's exactly one rank too low. He opens fire on Revan's own flagship, tearing apart the bridge, intending to kill his master and take the Sith Empire for himself outright. He succeeds at the second part. He doesn't quite manage the first. Revan survives, barely, grievously wounded, and Bastila's strike team finds him alive in the wreckage and takes him prisoner. The Order has a long-standing refusal to kill prisoners, no matter how monstrous the crime, and Revan, the man responsible for a staggering share of the death toll in 2 consecutive wars, qualifies about as much as anyone ever has. Instead, the Council makes a stranger, more surgical choice. They use the Force to wipe his mind completely, erasing Revan and everything he became, and rebuild him from scratch as an ordinary person with no memory of ever being a Jedi, let alone a Dark Lord. That person, alongside Bastila, ends up unconsciously retracing his own past. Sent out to track down ancient Rakatan star maps, navigational data pointing toward the Starforge itself, he keeps ending up in places that feel oddly, unaccountably familiar, without knowing why. Piece by piece, fragments of his old memory start surfacing. By the time he's closing in on the Starforge, he's starting to understand exactly who he used to be, and exactly what he's walking back into. Malak, meanwhile, hasn't been sitting idle with his stolen throne. He captures Bastila at some point during all this, and does to her almost the exact thing that once happened to him and Revan out in the unknown regions, breaks her down and turns her to the dark side, weaponizing someone Revan cares about against him personally. It's a nasty, almost poetic bit of cruelty from a man who knows precisely how effective that kind of manipulation can be, because it's what built his own empire in the first place. It all comes down to the Starforge itself. Revan, now fully aware of his own history and choosing, this time, to walk a different path with that knowledge, leads the remaining Republic fleet in a final assault on the station. He manages to pull Bastila back from the dark side before the confrontation is over, redeeming her the same way the Jedi once tried and failed to redeem him the easy way. Then he faces Malak directly, a straight fight between the man Malak used to follow and the man Malak became by trying to replace him. Revan wins, Malak dies. The Starforge, the engine behind this entire war, gets destroyed in the same battle, taking the last of Malak's Sith Empire down with it. So what does the Order actually take away from a war like this? Not beware the dark side. They already knew that painfully from Exar Kun and Ulic Qel-Droma centuries earlier. This one cuts deeper into something closer to institutional trust. The two Jedi who did the most good for the Republic, who won an unwinnable war and became legends doing it, turned out to be the exact people capable of nearly destroying everything they saved. Talent, conviction, charisma, battlefield brilliance, none of it inoculates you against the fall. If anything, this war argues the opposite, that the more capable and celebrated a Jedi becomes, the more damage they can do if something in them breaks. That's the lesson that gets burned into Jedi doctrine for the next 4,000 years, and it's going to shape how the Order treats its own most gifted members for the rest of its existence, with a wariness that, as we'll see later, comes with its own costs. 3,956 BBY. Revan has just destroyed Malak and the Starforge. The Jedi Civil War is over, and if you're the Republic right now, you're allowed to breathe for a second. You shouldn't get too comfortable with that breath, because it's not going to last. The thing about a Sith Empire, when its leader dies, it doesn't disappear cleanly. It shatters into pieces, and every one of those pieces is still armed, still trained, still dangerous, and now answerable to nobody. Within a few years of Malak's death, 3 of those pieces find each other and coalesce into something new. The Sith Triumvirate. 3 Dark Lords. Darth Traya, who used to be a respected Jedi named Kreia. She actually helped train both Revan and Bastila Shan before her own fall, which tells you something about how thin the line between mentor and monster can get in this history. And her 2 students, each terrifying in a completely different way, Darth Nihilus and Darth Sion. What this triumvirate does next isn't a war in the sense you've been watching so far. Their goal is simple and total: exterminate the Jedi Order, one target at a time, through assassination, ambush and horror, rather than open confrontation. Nihilus is the more monstrous of the 2. Calling him a Dark Lord almost undersells what he actually is: a living wound in the Force, hungry in a way that goes past any normal appetite for power. He can consume the life energy of an entire planet in a single sitting, and he proves it on the world of Qatar, wiping out nearly every living thing there in one stroke, including most of what's left of the Jedi Council, who happen to be meeting there at the worst possible time. Sion, meanwhile, is almost impossible to kill through conventional means, animated by raw pain and hatred rather than a body that has any business still functioning. And he runs a squad of Sith assassins who hunt Jedi Masters down individually, methodically, one name at a time. Between the 2 of them, and Traya directing from the shadows, the Jedi Order gets pushed to the actual edge of extinction, nearly gone in the span of just a few years. What saves them, in the end, is one person nobody expected, a Jedi Knight named Mitra Surik, exiled by her own council years earlier for the crime of following Revan into the Mandalorian Wars. The same Surik who severed her connection to the Force during the horror at Malachor 5, just to survive the psychic shockwave of that many deaths at once. She comes back into known space right as the Purge is at its worst, gets hunted by the very Sith trying to finish off the Jedi, and instead of running, she turns around and goes looking for them. She corners Nihilus above Telos and kills him aboard his own flagship. Then she tracks Sion and Trier back to their stronghold, on a planet that should feel familiar by now, Malachor 5 again. She kills them both there, in 3951 BBY, ending the triumvirate for good. An exiled outcast the Order had formerly rejected turns out to be the only person capable of saving it. The Jedi survived the Dark Wars, but they survived because of someone they'd already given up on, not because of anything the institution itself did right. That should be the end of it for a good long while. And it mostly is, for almost 2,000 years actually, which is longer than the entire span of history from the fall of Rome to right now. Somewhere around 2000 BBY, a different kind of conflict starts creeping into the record. Historians will eventually give it one name, the new Sith Wars, but calling it a single war is a little misleading. It's closer to a chronic condition than a war. A Sith faction rises somewhere in the galaxy, gathers just enough strength to threaten the Republic, and then, with almost mechanical consistency, tears itself apart from the inside before the Jedi even have to land the finishing blow. Rival Dark Lords betray each other. Alliances collapse under the weight of everyone's individual ambition. Then a few years or decades later, it happens again, somewhere else, with different names attached to the same basic pattern. I want you to imagine living through this as an ordinary citizen of the Republic during this stretch. You're watching your government spend 1,000 years lurching from one flare-up to the next, never quite at peace, never quite in existential danger either, just perpetually managing a low-grade fire that keeps reigniting in new places. What does that do to a civilization over that much time? It doesn't make people brave or battle-hardened, it makes them tired. It makes them want a government that promises stability above almost everything else, even if stability means giving up a little control to a more centralized authority. Every time a Sith faction flares up and collapses, the Republic comes out the other side, a bit more consolidated, a bit more bureaucratic, leaning a bit harder on the Jedi to handle the parts of governing it doesn't want to deal with directly. By the time we reach the final chapter of the new Sith Wars, this self-destructive pattern has repeated often enough that it stops looking like bad luck, more like a structural flaw baked into how the Sith organize power. And there's one particular Sith Lord who's been watching that pattern very, very closely and has started to suspect he knows exactly why it keeps happening. The last major Sith faction of the new Sith Wars calls itself the Brotherhood of Darkness, led by a former Jedi Master turned Dark Lord named Skira Khan. Khan's whole political pitch, if you can call it that, is equality. No single supreme ruler, just a council of Dark Lords, all supposedly holding equal power and equal say. On paper, it's almost a reasonable-sounding alternative to the usual one-tyrant model. In practice, it produces exactly the failure mode you'd expect by now. Constant infighting, ambitious Dark Lords more invested in outshining each other than in cooperating against a shared enemy. Resources bled dry by internal rivalry instead of external conquest. The Brotherhood grinds against the Jedi's army of light for years and slowly, painfully, loses. By 1000 BBY, they're cornered on a world called Ruusan, fighting what's shaping up to be their last stand. Inside Khan's own ranks is a former slave, trained up through the Sith Academy on Korriban, who goes by the name Bane. And Bane has quietly stopped believing in any of it. Not the dark side itself, he's completely committed to that, but the entire structure Khan built around it. He watches Khan's council bicker and posture while the war slips away from them, and he becomes convinced that the equality Khan preaches isn't a strength. It's the exact weakness that's doomed every Sith uprising for the last 1,000 years. So he leaves. He tracks down an old Sith holocron left behind by Darth Revan himself, buried in a forgotten temple, and pores over it obsessively. Inside it, alongside a wealth of other dark side knowledge, he finds something called a thought bomb, a ritual capable of annihilating every Force-sensitive being within its blast radius, with total, indiscriminate finality. Bane doesn't use it on his own terms. He brings it back to Khan as a gift. He frames it as the answer to the Brotherhood's problems, the weapon that can finally break the deadlock at Ruusan and wipe out the entire Jedi army in a single, overwhelming stroke. What he very deliberately leaves out is the part where the bomb doesn't distinguish between the people casting it and the people it's aimed at. And to make absolutely certain Khan actually reaches for that weapon instead of finding some other way out, Bane quietly sabotages the Brotherhood's own war effort, ordering a reckless fleet engagement that hands the Jedi a decisive advantage and forces the Sith into a full retreat, cornered in caves with nowhere left to run and no options left on the table except the one Bane just happened to hand them. Khan, believing that his people will somehow be spared the bomb's effects, goes through with it. The detonation kills nearly the entire Brotherhood of Darkness in an instant. Every Dark Lord in those caves, gone. It also reaches out far enough to kill a massive portion of the Jedi's Army of Light, including their own commander, a Jedi Master named Hoth, who dies fighting an enemy that has, at that exact moment, already destroyed itself without him ever knowing it. Bane made sure he was well outside the blast radius when it happened, along with one other person, a young Force-sensitive girl named Xana, found wandering near the battlefield in the war's chaos. They feel the aftershock of that much death rolling through the Force. That's all. Everyone closer doesn't survive to feel anything at all. And the actual insight underneath all of that scheming, the thing the entire con was built to prove. Bane looks back at 1,000 years of Sith factions rising and then destroying themselves through their own internal rot, and he draws a conclusion nobody before him had been willing to fully commit to. The problem was never a shortage of numbers. It was the numbers themselves. Every crowd of Sith Lords, no matter how the hierarchy was arranged, eventually turned its ambition inward, because ambition left with nothing external to conquer will always start looking for something closer to home, to devour. More Sith didn't mean more strength. It meant more seams for the whole structure to eventually tear along. So Bane sets down a new law, and this one is going to define the Sith for the next 1,000 years without a single deviation. Only two. One master who holds and embodies the full weight of the dark side's power. One apprentice whose entire purpose is to hunger for that power and work, patiently, toward the day they're strong enough to kill their master and claim it for themselves. To the rest of the galaxy, none of this internal philosophy matters, because none of it is visible. What's visible is that Ruusan looks, from the outside, like exactly the ending everyone's been fighting 1,000 years for. Total victory. The Brotherhood annihilated down to the last Dark Lord. The Sith, as far as any historian or Jedi Master can tell, wiped out completely and permanently. The Republic even restructures its own government in the aftermath, a shift known afterward as the Ruusan Reformation, consolidating power, streamlining bureaucracy, tightening the relationship between the Senate and the Jedi Order in ways that are going to echo for the next 1,000 years, right up through the Republic you'll recognize from the films. Nobody in that newly reorganized government has the faintest idea that a single Sith Lord and a young orphaned girl walked away from Ruusan very much alive, and that the war they think they just won didn't actually end. It just stopped being visible, on purpose, forever. For the next 1,000 years, exactly 2 Sith exist anywhere in the galaxy at any given time, and they make absolutely certain of one thing above all else, that nobody ever finds them. Master trains apprentice, in total isolation, generation after generation. Eventually, the apprentice kills the master, claims the title, and takes on an apprentice of their own to begin the cycle again. And the Jedi, they relax. Across that same 1,000 years, the Jedi shift, generation by generation, from battlefield warrior monks into something that looks a lot more like diplomats, Senate advisors, and professional mediators for a republic that has grown too large, too tangled, and too bureaucratic to manage its own internal disputes without outside help. It's comfortable work, it's stable work, fewer lightsabers drawn in anger, more negotiations conducted in council chambers. And it is, without any of them realizing it, precisely the kind of comfort a patient, hidden enemy would be counting on them to settle into. Because an enemy that just spent 1,000 years learning the hard way that too many Sith Lords always eventually betray each other, has also learned the value of waiting quietly for exactly the right moment to stop being just two people in the shadows. 232 BBY, the thriving stretch of time where the Jedi Order is doing exactly what it was always supposed to do, at a scale it's never managed before, and the whole galaxy actually notices. The Republic at this point is led by a Supreme Chancellor named Lina So, and she's got a vision that's ambitious for a government this size. Push outward, bring the unexplored Outer Rim into the fold, and do it through cooperation and infrastructure rather than conquest. She calls these projects her great works, and the crown jewel of the whole initiative is a space station called Starlight Beacon, launched right around this exact year, out in the far edge of explored space, in a region so poorly charted that the station's own signal is what helps ships navigate safely through it. Starlight got a Jedi temple built directly into it. It functions as a research station, a medical hub, a cultural showcase representing dozens of different worlds and species, all under one roof. And if things go sideways in that sector, it can become a military rally point and a safe haven almost instantly. It's basically the physical embodiment of what the Republic wants people out on the frontier to feel. You are not alone out here, and you are not forgotten. For a government that spans an entire galaxy, that's an enormous, almost impossible promise to make credible. And for a while, remarkably, it works. Jedi Masters and Knights showing up to help with a supply shortage, a natural disaster, a dispute between neighbouring settlements, sometimes just showing up to check in because someone asked them to. Avar Kriss, one of the most respected Jedi Masters of this entire era, ends up stationed as the Marshal of Starlight Beacon itself, which tells you how seriously the Order is taking this outreach. Everything was fine for a while on the way to the next disaster, but everything being fine, on this scale, for this long, is rare in this history. Ordinary people across dozens of systems are growing up seeing Jedi as neighbours and protectors instead of distant legends from old stories. Kids on some backwater mining colony can point at a Jedi Knight walking through their settlement and think that's normal, instead of that's a myth come to life. The Republic itself feels like it's finally growing with some actual direction behind it too, and that matters just as much as the Jedi's role in all this. The galaxy is getting bigger, and somehow feeling more connected at the same time, instead of more spread out and vulnerable. It genuinely feels, if you're living through this moment without the benefit of hindsight, like the Order has finally outgrown its own worst instincts. Right in the middle of the Golden Age, something's been quietly growing on the edges of the map that nobody in power is taking seriously. They're called the Nihil, and if you asked a Republic official at this point what that word means, you'd probably get a shrug and a comparison to garden variety pirates. Marauders, raiders, annoying, occasionally dangerous, but fundamentally small time. The kind of nuisance a galaxy this large just learns to live with on its unpoliced fringes. A civilization spanning this many star systems simply cannot pay close attention to everything happening at once, and the Nihil have figured out exactly how to exploit that blind spot. They're organized in a structure inspired by violent weather. The whole group split into factions called Tempests, each one run by a lieutenant called a Runner, with ranks underneath named Storms, Clouds and Strikes. It's theatrical, sure, but it's also an effective way to run a decentralized criminal organization that can hit multiple places at once and never present a single target worth the Republic's full attention. Behind all of it sits one figure who matters more than any Tempest runner, the Eye of the Nihil, a title currently held by a man named Markshan Rowe. And Rowe isn't in this for plunder, not really. His family has held a grudge against the Jedi and the Republic for roughly a century and a half, going back to an old cult his ancestors were part of, one that hated the Force and everyone who wielded it. Rowe inherited that grudge along with his father's position, and he inherited something else too, control over a piece of technology that makes the Nihil far more dangerous than any ordinary band of raiders has any right to be. They're called path engines, and what they let the Nihil do is treat hyperspace itself as a weapon. Most ships travel known, charted hyperlanes, routes that have been mapped and verified as safe over centuries. The Nihil using knowledge passed down through Ro's family, can find and use hidden routes through hyperspace that shouldn't be navigable at all, appearing where nobody expects them, vanishing before anyone can retaliate. It's less like fighting an army and more like fighting weather that occasionally decides to raid your shipping lanes. You can't predict where it's going to hit, so you can't defend against it, and by the time you've mobilized a response, it's already gone. Ro decides to use that unpredictability for something much bigger than piracy. In 232 BBY, he deliberately sends a single Nihil ship down a hidden path that puts it directly in the way of a massive transport called the Legacy Run, in the middle of the flight in hyperspace, on a route so heavily travelled that a collision there should be close to statistically impossible. The Legacy Run's captain sees the obstacle appear out of nowhere, with only seconds to react, tries to steer clear, and very nearly makes it. Almost isn't good enough. The ship is old, well past the point most captains would have retired it, and the impact tears it apart completely. Because the collision happens in hyperspace, the wreckage doesn't drift the way normal debris would. Pieces of the Legacy Run keep moving at hyperspace velocity, still technically inside that faster-than-light bubble, and they start randomly dropping back into real space at unpredictable points, slamming into whatever happens to be in the way with catastrophic force. These events get a name, emergencies, and they don't stop after the first one. Debris keeps reappearing across the outer rim for weeks, striking systems that had absolutely nothing to do with the original disaster. Entire moons in the Trimont system get wiped out this way. The first system to take a direct hit is Abdalis, and while I won't hand you a precise casualty figure, the devastation there is real, and it's the opening horror of what's about to become a much larger crisis. And this is where the Republic gets its first real look at what they're actually dealing with, though they don't fully understand it yet. It's a single act of sabotage, engineered by one man, that ends up killing more people across more worlds than most declared wars manage in years. And he did it without a single Force-sensitive soldier, without a Sith Lord anywhere in the chain of command, using nothing but knowledge of hyperspace and a willingness to treat a transport full of people as an acceptable loss in service of a plan nobody else can even see yet. The Hetzel system ends up at the centre of the worst of it, a trinary star system directly in the path of an enormous amount of incoming debris, including a canister of dangerously volatile fuel on a collision course that could take out the entire system's star if nobody intervenes in time. And this is where the Jedi respond. Jedi Master Avar Kriss, happening to be nearby, fresh off a tour of the nearly finished Starlight Beacon, coordinates what becomes the largest rescue effort in the Order's history. Over 100 Jedi, working in real time across an entire star system, alongside dozens of Republic cruisers, racing falling wreckage that doesn't care what's underneath it. What Kriss manages to do here is remarkable. She uses a rare, unusually powerful ability to link Jedi together across the system through the Force itself, creating something like a shared network of intention and effort, dozens of minds working as one coordinated will to redirect that volatile fuel canister away from Hetzel's star before it can trigger a catastrophe that would have wiped out the entire system. It works. Hetzel survives. Every world in that system that could have died that day doesn't. And Avar Kriss walks away from it with a title that's going to follow her for the rest of her life, the hero of Hetzel. The emergencies don't stop just because Hetzel got saved. Fragments of the Legacy Run keep dropping out of hyperspace at random points across the Outer Rim for a while afterward, forcing the Republic into an unprecedented and deeply unpopular decision. Shutting down major hyperspace lanes across huge stretches of the frontier just to keep more ships from colliding with debris nobody can predict. It strangles trade, it cuts off worlds that were only just starting to feel connected to the wider galaxy. The exact worlds Chancellor So's whole vision was supposed to be helping. And through all of it, the Republic still doesn't fully understand what caused any of this, or that a single man orchestrated the entire thing on purpose. The Jedi did everything right in that moment. The fastest, most coordinated, most selfless response the Order could possibly have mounted, and it saved an entire star system from annihilation. And it still wasn't enough to see the actual shape of the trap they'd just walked into, because the trap wasn't really about Hetzel at all. Hetzel was a byproduct, The real target was the Republic's confidence, its sense that a crisis this scale was even possible in the golden age it thought it was living in. Martian Row isn't finished, not close. In the aftermath of the Great Disaster, the Republic tries to project strength and unity, the only way a government its size knows how, with a celebration. Chancellor So calls it the Republic Fair, held on the planet Valo, one of her signature great works, designed explicitly to show the galaxy that the Republic has weathered the crisis and come out the other side intact. Delegations from dozens of worlds, Jedi in attendance, a visible, deliberate statement. We are still here, we are still united, and we are not afraid. The Nihil attack in the middle of it. A calculated humiliation engineered specifically to happen at the exact moment the Republic chose to declare itself recovered, in front of the exact audience the Republic wanted to impress. And Roe is after something specific here too. Beyond the raw carnage of an attack, he's hunting for creatures called the Nameless, monstrous beings that don't attack a Force user's body so much as their connection to the Force itself, severing it, stripping it away entirely, sometimes permanently. Weapons that specifically punish the one thing that makes a Jedi in the first place. Every threat we've covered up to now has been a threat the Force could meet head-on. Lightsabers, Force powers, training, discipline, all of it built on the assumption that the Force itself is the Jedi's greatest asset, the thing that makes them uniquely capable of handling danger nobody else can. The Nameless break that assumption completely. Against a creature like this, being strong in the Force doesn't protect you. It might be the exact thing that gets you targeted. That reality lands with brutal clarity, not long after the fair itself, during the Republic's counter-offensive against Nihil hideouts scattered across the frontier. Jedi Master Loden Greatstorm, investigating a Nihil base alongside other Jedi, comes face to face with one of the Nameless. And it doesn't cut him down or strike him with a weapon. It drains him, turns him, in front of his own Padawan, a young Jedi named Bel Zetifar, into something closer to an empty shell than a body. Alive, perhaps, in some clinical sense, but hollowed out of the Force entirely, and hollowed out of whatever made him who he was along with it. Bel watches this happen to his own master. 230 BBY. 2 years after its dedication, Starlight Beacon isn't hosting a celebration this time. The planet Eram down below just got hit by a cyclone violent enough to wreck the desalination plants that provide its entire population with fresh water. And the Republic's answer is to tow the whole station into orbit above the planet to help with repairs and relief. Repairs are almost finished. Iram is even planning a small celebration to mark it. Martian Row sees an opportunity in exactly that ordinariness, and he's been waiting for one. His agents have already infiltrated the station, and when Row gives the signal, bombs go off simultaneously in multiple sections. Communications across the entire station get cut instantly, so nobody trapped in one section has any way to coordinate with anyone trapped in another. The hangar bays get sealed shut, locking escape ships in place before anyone can even reach them. Lights go dark in the medical wing specifically, where the most vulnerable people on the station happen to be. And into all of that chaos, Row's people release the Nameless, the same creatures that hollowed out Loden Greatstorm, turning them loose inside a station now full of panicked, disoriented Jedi who can't call for help and can't get to the ships that might save them. Every single one of those failures is calculated to hit exactly where it hurts most, and the station starts to fall. The explosion sends it drifting steadily toward Iram's surface, a slow, horrifying countdown rather than a sudden crash. Station personnel and Jedi on the ground can actually watch it happening, minute by minute, unable to stop what's coming. Inside, amid all of that, there are still people trying to hold the thing together, in every sense of that phrase. Jedi Master Estelar Maru ends up at the very hub of the station, using the Force to physically hold its structure from tearing itself apart, buying every extra minute he possibly can for more people to reach an escape route. He does this essentially alone for a stretch of time that should be physically impossible to sustain, refusing to leave his post even when others beg him to save himself. When Avar Kriss finally reaches him, she reinforces him, activating her rare ability to link Jedi together through the Force and channeling that combined strength into holding the station's two halves together just a little longer. giving stragglers scattered across starlight one more chance to get clear before the end. Not everyone gets that chance. The Nameless spread through corridors, faster than anyone can contain them, and more than one Jedi meets the same fate Loden Greatstorm did, turned into an empty, calcified husk, alive in the most technical sense and gone in every way that actually matters. Among the dead is Jedi Master Stellan Gios, one of the more respected and beloved figures on the station, someone whose loss is going to be felt for a long time by the people who survive him. One of those people is Bel Zettifar, in the middle of this new catastrophe, with the medical wing plunged into darkness and cut off from the rest of the station. Bel finds a way to save the patients trapped there. He rigs an explosion to physically separate the medical tower from the rest of the collapsing structure, giving it enough independence to be recovered separately by a ship from Irem, saving everyone inside it, even as the rest of the station continues falling apart around them. In the end, none of it is enough to save the station itself. The top half of Starlight Beacon separates completely from the lower half and plunges into Irem's atmosphere, burning up on the way down, killing everyone who couldn't get clear in time. It crashes into the planet's ocean, close enough to a coastal city that the impact triggers a tsunami on top of everything else, adding flood damage to a population that had just barely started recovering from the cyclone that brought Starlight there in the first place. Dozens of Jedi die in total, masters, knights, Padawans, people who came to this station to help rebuild a broken planet and instead became part of its worst day in living memory. Avar Kriss, the hero of Hetzel, is left standing on Irem, watching the thing she couldn't save fall into the sea. She blames herself for it completely, rightly or not, and in the aftermath, she does something that tells you exactly how deep that guilt cuts. She leaves the structure and support of the Jedi Order behind entirely and disappears into Nihil-controlled space, alone, chasing Marchion Ro with something that looks a lot less like justice and a lot more like vengeance. That's the real cost of this event, maybe even more than the death toll itself. The Republic's proudest achievement of the entire Golden Age becomes its first true mass casualty disaster in living memory, and one of its most trusted, most capable Jedi walks away from the Order that shaped her because the loss is too large to carry inside its usual boundaries of patience and restraint. 32 BBY. 200 years pass between the fall of Starlight Beacon and where we're picking things up now. And I'm not going to pretend that gap is empty. It isn't. On the surface, the Republic looks stable, enormous, slow-moving, bureaucratic, in the way any government gets after managing a galaxy's worth of competing interests for this many centuries, but not in any obvious danger. Underneath that surface, a Sith Lord named Darth Sidious has been building toward this exact moment for years, in complete secrecy, using a public identity nobody has any reason to suspect. A mild-mannered, well-liked senator from the peaceful world of Naboo named Sheev Palpatine. He's sitting in the Senate, year after year, cultivating relationships, learning exactly how the Republic's bureaucracy works well enough to eventually break it from the inside, and doing all of it patiently enough that nobody, not the Jedi, not his fellow senators, not even his own allies, has the faintest idea what he actually is. He makes his move. Using his influence over the Trade Federation, he engineers a blockade and eventual invasion of his own homeworld, Naboo, a crisis he has no intention of losing control of, because he's the one steering it from both sides. Jedi are sent to negotiate, nearly get killed for their trouble, and end up rescuing Naboo's young queen instead. Sidious's own apprentice at the time, a fearsome Zabrak named Darth Maul, gets sent in to make sure the situation escalates exactly as planned. In the chaos of the invasion, the Republic's existing Chancellor gets voted out for failing to act, and the Senate, moved by sympathy for what Naboo just went through, elects a replacement. Palpatine. Sidious created a crisis specifically shaped to make himself look like the sympathetic solution to it, then let democracy itself hand him the office he needed, with every vote cast by people who had no idea they were doing exactly what he wanted. That's patience weaponized on a scale nobody in this entire 25,000-year history has managed before. Maul doesn't survive the crisis intact. He's defeated in a duel by a young Jedi named Obi-Wan Kenobi, though not definitively confirmed dead, which is going to matter more than anyone realizes at the time. And around this same period, Sidious quietly kills his own master, a Sith Lord named Darth Plagueis, following the same rule of two that's governed the Sith for 1,000 years. A master killed by his own apprentice the moment that apprentice is ready to stand alone. Sidious loses no time replacing what he's lost. He finds his next apprentice in a disillusioned former Jedi Master named Count Dooku, a man who left the Order out of frustration with exactly the kind of institutional stagnation we're about to spend the rest of this story watching play out. Dooku takes the name Darth Tyrannus, and unlike Maul, he isn't a blunt instrument. He's a diplomat, a political operator, someone who can build an actual movement rather than just intimidate people with a lightsaber. For the next decade, the galaxy experiences something that looks, from the outside, exactly like peace. Palpatine governs as a popular, trusted chancellor. The Jedi continue doing what they've been doing for 1,000 years, since Bane's rule of two convinced everyone the Sith were extinct, serving as diplomats, mediators, the Senate's most trusted problem solvers for disputes it doesn't want to handle itself. Nobody is looking for a hidden enemy, because as far as anyone can tell, there hasn't been one in a millennium. Underneath that surface calm, Dooku is doing exactly the kind of patient, structural work his master taught him, cultivates political grievances among systems that feel neglected or exploited by an increasingly bloated central government, and lays the groundwork for what's eventually going to become a full-scale secession movement. At the same time, in one of the more quietly disturbing details of this whole build-up, Dooku arranges the death of a Jedi Master named Sifo Dyas, who had secretly commissioned an enormous clone army from a cloning facility on a remote world called Kamino, technically on the Jedi's own authority, though the Council itself never approved it. Dooku takes over that secret arrangement after Sifo Dyas is gone, making sure that army keeps growing, quietly, for a war nobody in the Republic officially knows is coming. On one side, Dooku is assembling a coalition of systems ready to secede from the Republic entirely, the beginnings of what will become the Confederacy of Independent Systems. On the other side, without anyone connecting the two, an entire clone army is being grown in secret, ready to be discovered at exactly the moment the Republic desperately needs one. And standing above both sides, controlling each of them without either fully realizing it, is one man holding two identities. Right in the middle of that Naboo crisis, in the middle of that chaos, a Jedi Master named Qui-Gon Jinn, stranded on Tatooine while his ship gets repaired, meets a 9-year-old slave boy who can fix or build almost anything with his hands, who's freakishly gifted behind the controls of anything that flies, and who tests, when Qui-Gon checks his blood, with more midi-chlorians than any Force-sensitive being on record, more than Yoda, more than anyone. Qui-Gon becomes convinced, immediately and completely, that this kid is the answer to an old Jedi prophecy, the Chosen One, foretold to bring balance to the Force. He wins the boy's freedom in a race, brings him to the Jedi Temple, and tries to get the Council to let him train the boy directly. They refuse. Anakin's too old by Jedi standards, too attached to his mother, and the Council can sense real fear in him, the specific fear of losing people he loves, which is exactly the kind of emotional foothold that can eventually curdle into something darker. It's Yoda himself who's the most skeptical. But then Qui-Gon dies, cut down by Darth Maul in the climax of that same crisis, and his dying wish is that his own Padawan, Obi-Wan Kenobi, take Anakin as his student instead. Obi-Wan, freshly knighted the same day his master dies, agrees. Whatever the Council's reservations, a promise made to a dying man carries its own kind of weight. So for the next 10 years, while the galaxy enjoys what looks like uninterrupted peace and Sidious quietly builds his war behind the scenes, Anakin grows up inside the Jedi Order as Obi-Wan's Padawan. He's brilliant, arguably more naturally gifted than any Jedi in living memory, and also lonely, a little arrogant, and still carrying an old unresolved ache about the mother he left behind in slavery. By 22 BBY, he's 19 years old, technically still a Padawan, technically still bound by all the restrictions that come with that rank, and he's just been assigned, alongside Obi-Wan, to protect a senator from Naboo, Padme Amidala. If that name sounds familiar, it's because she's the same young queen Anakin met as a 9-year-old slave, a decade earlier, during the Naboo crisis that started all of this. The two of them fall for each other almost immediately, which is a real problem, because the Jedi Code strictly forbids romantic attachment. They keep it hidden. It's going to matter a great deal later, but for now, it's mostly just two people falling in love at the exact wrong moment in galactic history to be doing so. While Obi-Wan investigates who's actually behind the assassination attempts on Padme, he ends up tracing the trail to a remote water world called Kamino, and what he finds there should terrify him more than it initially seems to. An entire clone army, already grown, already trained, commissioned years earlier under the authority of a Jedi Master who's since turned up dead. Obi-Wan's investigation eventually leads him to Geonosis, where he discovers something even bigger. A gathering of the galaxy's major manufacturing conglomerates and disaffected systems, all meeting under the leadership of a fallen Jedi Master turned political leader, Count Dooku, revealed here as the architect of a growing secessionist movement. Obi-Wan gets caught transmitting this discovery back to Coruscant and is taken prisoner before he can finish his report. Meanwhile, Anakin's been struggling with something that has nothing to do with any of this political maneuvering. He's been having nightmares about his mother, Shmi, still enslaved back on Tatooine, dying in pain. Against Obi-Wan's explicit orders to stay with Padme, he takes her with him to Tatooine to check on his mother, and finds she's already been kidnapped by Tusken raiders. He tracks her down, finds her barely alive, and she dies in his arms moments after he reaches her. What happens next is the first real, visible crack in who Anakin is supposed to become. Consumed by grief and rage, in a way nothing in his Jedi training prepared him for, he goes back to that Tusken camp and kills every single person there. Men, women, children, all of them. In an act of violence, far beyond anything the situation required. There's no time to process any of it, though, because word reaches them that Obi-Wan's been captured on Geonosis. Anakin and Padme go after him, against direct council orders, and predictably, all three of them end up captured by the Separatists and sentenced to public execution in the Petranaki arena, thrown in to be killed by monstrous beasts in front of a cheering Geonosian crowd, while Dooku and the Separatist leadership watch. 200 Jedi, Knights, Masters, nearly every combat-capable member of the Order who can be spared, arrive under Mace Windu's command to storm the arena and pull all three of them out alive. For a moment, it works. 200 lightsabers igniting simultaneously in the middle of a Separatist stronghold is as close to an unstoppable force as the Jedi have fielded in 1,000 years. Except the Separatists have a droid army waiting, and it's enormous, larger and better equipped than anyone in the Republic anticipated. The Jedi, brilliant as they are individually, start getting cut down in a straightforward war of attrition against overwhelming numbers. This is the moment where 25,000 years of institutional drift catches up with the Order all at once. These are diplomats and mediators, not soldiers who fought a sustained large-scale war in generations. Being the best duelist in the galaxy doesn't mean much when you're outnumbered on an open battlefield by an army that doesn't get tired and doesn't feel fear. And then the clone army arrives. Yoda himself, having pieced together what Obi-Wan discovered on Kamino, makes the call that this secret, ethically murky army the Republic never officially approved is now the only thing standing between 200 trapped Jedi and total annihilation. Thousands of clone troopers descend on Geonosis in Republic gunships, turning what was about to be a massacre into an actual battle, and the tide shifts hard enough that the Separatists are forced into retreat. Dooku doesn't stick around to watch his droid army finish losing. He tries to escape, and Obi-Wan, Anakin, and Yoda corner him first. What follows is one of the more devastating fights in this entire history. Obi-Wan and Anakin, fighting together, still lose to Dooku decisively. Obi-Wan wounded badly enough to be taken out of the fight, and Anakin, rushing in with more fury than technique, getting his right arm severed clean off for his trouble. It's only Yoda's arrival that actually forces Dooku to break off and flee, and even Yoda can't stop him from escaping entirely. Before he goes, Dooku says something to Obi-Wan, that the entire Republic is secretly under the control of a Dark Lord of the Sith named Darth Sidious, and it changes nothing because there's no time, no proof, and no reason for anyone present to believe that the source is anything other than an enemy trying to sow confusion. So the day ends with the Jedi technically victorious. Obi-Wan, Anakin, and Padme alive, Dooku's droid army routed, and it also ends with an entire secret clone army now standing openly in service of the Republic. A war beginning that nobody in the government actually declared through any normal process, and Anakin Skywalker missing an arm and carrying a secret marriage he's about to make official with Padme almost immediately after this battle, alongside a grief-fueled massacre of an entire Tusken camp that nobody currently around him even knows happened. So the Clone Wars begins. The next 3 years is a war fought across the entire galaxy, on a scale the Republic hasn't managed since the ancient Mandalorian conflicts. Jedi generals leading clone battalions through campaigns on Christophsis, Ryloth, Mandalore, and against separatist superweapons like the warship Malevolence. A war covered in my other video, so I won't retread that ground here. 19 BBY, 3 years into the Clone Wars, and the man who's been secretly running both sides of it the entire time is finally ready to close the trap he's spent decades building. By this point, Anakin Skywalker isn't the 19-year-old Padawan. He's a war hero, a Jedi Knight, married in secret to Senator Padme Amidala, who's now pregnant. And he's terrified. He starts having visions, the same kind of prophetic dreams that once warned him about his mother. Except this time, they're of Padme, dying in childbirth. Chancellor Palpatine, who's spent Anakin's entire life cultivating a friendship with him, sees exactly the opening that fear provides and takes it. He tells Anakin, an old Sith legend, about a Dark Lord named Darth Plagueis, who supposedly unlocked a way to use the dark side to stop people from dying altogether. He's careful never to frame it as anything but a story. He doesn't have to push harder than that. Anakin does the rest of the work himself, turning the idea over and over, desperate enough for a way to save his wife that he's willing to consider where a story like that might actually lead. Then Palpatine simply tells him the truth. All Anakin has to do is choose. Anakin doesn't choose, not in that moment. He goes straight to Mace Windu and tells him everything. And Windu does exactly what a lifetime of Jedi training would tell him to do. He assembles a team, 4 of the most capable duelists left in the Order, and goes to arrest the Chancellor of the Republic for being a Sith Lord. Sidious doesn't stall, doesn't negotiate, doesn't pretend at diplomacy for even a second. He kills Collar and Tien almost instantly. Fisto goes down moments later. That's 3 Jedi Masters, dead in the time it takes to read this sentence, against a man the galaxy has spent over a decade calling a mild, trustworthy public servant. Only Windu is left standing, and Windu is good enough and desperate enough to actually win. He disarms Sidious, beats him to the floor, and stands over him with a killing blow ready. A decision in the moment that 1,000 years of Jedi restraint would ordinarily never allow, but which Windu justifies to himself as the only way to stop a threat this catastrophic before it can do any more damage. That's the exact moment Anakin arrives. He's been sent by Windu himself to stay behind and guard the Senate chambers, but he comes anyway, pulled by everything Sidious has spent years planting in him. The promise of power to save Padme, the growing distrust of a council that never fully trusted him back, the sense that the Jedi are one thing, and he might genuinely be something else. He sees Windu about to execute a defenseless, disarmed prisoner, and in that instant whatever's left of his Jedi instincts, and whatever Sidious has been cultivating in him, collide head-on. He begs Windu to stop to let the Senate decide Sidious's fate through a trial instead. Windu refuses, and Anakin, in the single most consequential decision, ignites his lightsaber and severs Windu's hand at the wrist. Sidious does the rest. Anakin doesn't get a moment to process what he's just done before Sidious is already reframing it for him. Horrified at himself, grieving something he can't take back, Anakin kneels and accepts. Sidious gives him a new name, Darth Vader, woven into every single clone trooper in the Grand Army of the Republic since the very beginning is a hidden biochip, implanted under the pretense of routine behavioral safeguards, quietly reprogrammed by Dooku and Sidious years ago. On Sidious's command, that chip activates. Order 66. Jedi generals across the entire galaxy, on dozens of different battlefields, are shot in the back by by the exact troops they trusted with their lives. In the same instant, with no warning and no way to fight back against an order that isn't coming from an enemy in front of them, but from the very army standing beside them. And while that's happening across the stars, the new Darth Vader leads the elite 501st Legion in an assault on the Jedi Temple itself. Back on Coruscant, he walks through the temple himself, and nobody inside is spared. An order that survived the Sith for 25,000 years, that outlasted the 100-year darkness, the new Sith Wars, 1,000 years of Bane's rule of two hiding in plain sight, is annihilated in under a single day. Only a handful of Jedi survived the initial purge. Obi-Wan Kenobi, fighting General Grievous on a distant world, senses what's happening and barely escapes his own men turning on him. Yoda, on the jungle world Kashyyyk, does the same, cutting down the clones around him the instant he feels the shift and fleeing into hiding. When the two of them eventually make their way back to the smoking ruins of the Jedi Temple, they find exactly what you'd expect, and nothing that prepares them for it. Bodies of masters and children both. The halls of an institution that had stood for 25,000 years, reduced to a crime scene in a single night. And in the Senate, Palpatine stands before a galaxy that has no idea any of this happened by his design, and tells them the Jedi attempted to seize control of the Republic for themselves. That this attack, this purge, this transformation he's about to announce is simply the necessary response to a rebellion he was forced to crush. To ensure the security and continuity of the galaxy, he declares, the Republic will be reorganized into the First Galactic Empire, with himself at its head, no longer Chancellor, but Emperor. The Republic that 1,000 years of expansion, bureaucracy, and dependence on the Jedi slowly built into exactly the kind of institution one patient man could hollow out from the inside. It dissolves in that same speech, into the very thing it spent 25,000 years, in one form or another, trying to prevent. Padme, desperate and still refusing to believe her husband is truly gone, flies to Mustafar to plead with him. When Anakin sees Obi-Wan step out of the shadows behind her, something in him snaps completely. He hears betrayal, convinced, wrongly, that Padme led his enemy straight to him, and he chokes her unconscious with the Force before he and Obi-Wan even draw their blades. What follows is the fight this entire trilogy has been building toward. This is a man fighting the person who trained him, fought beside him, called him brother for over a decade, and the person on the other end of that blade doing everything he possibly can not to have to kill him. Obi-Wan spends most of the fight trying to talk Anakin down rather than trying to win outright, even as Anakin comes at him with nothing held back. It's only when Obi-Wan finally gains the high ground that you see how far gone Anakin actually is. Obi-Wan warns him, plainly, not to try anything. Anakin tries anyway, and Obi-Wan ends the fight by severing his opponent's remaining limbs, leaving him broken on the black volcanic sand at the edge of a river of lava that finishes the job. The duel started, setting him on fire where he lies. Obi-Wan doesn't finish him. He can't. He looks at what's left of the person who used to be Anakin Skywalker, tells him he loved him like a brother, that this is what he brought upon himself, and walks away, leaving him to die. Darth Sidious, sensing his apprentice in mortal danger, arrives just in time to recover what's left of him and rush him back to Coruscant, where what remains of Anakin's body is rebuilt inside a suit of black armor and a respirator he's going to wear for the rest of his life. The man who steps out of that reconstruction isn't really Anakin Skywalker returning from the brink. He's something new, assembled out of the wreckage, and he's going to be known from this point forward only by the name Sidious gave him on the floor of a Senate office, Darth Vader. Yoda retreats. He goes into hiding on a remote swamp world called Dagobah, choosing exile over a fight he can't be certain of winning, and waits. Padme, meanwhile, gives birth to twins on a remote asteroid outpost, dying shortly afterward. The medical droids attending her can find no physical cause. She simply loses the will to keep living, still believing, even now, that there's good left in the man she married. To keep the children hidden from a Sith Lord who would sense a bloodline connection to his own fallen apprentice, Obi-Wan and Yoda make the hardest decision of the entire aftermath: split the twins up completely. The daughter, Leia, goes to Senator Bail Organa on Alderaan, raised as royalty with no idea of her true parentage. The son, Luke, goes to Anakin's own stepbrother, Owen Lars, and his wife Beru on the one planet Vader would presumably never think to look for anything. Tatooine, the same desert world Anakin himself grew up enslaved on. Obi-Wan settles nearby as a recluse, watching over the boy he can't train, can't even acknowledge, for nearly 2 decades. That child grows up knowing nothing about any of this. Luke Skywalker spends his childhood as a farm boy on Tatooine, restless, dreaming about a galaxy he's never seen, with no idea his father is currently the most feared enforcer in the entire Empire. It takes a stolen message hidden in a droid, a chance encounter with the hermit everyone calls Old Ben, and the destruction of his aunt and uncle by Imperial stormtroopers to finally pull him off that farm and into the exact story he was always going to end up inside of. Obi-Wan trains him just enough, in the barest fragments of time available, before dying at Vader's blade aboard the very first Death Star, a battle station Luke ends up destroying single-handedly days later, trusting the Force over his targeting computer in the exact kind of instinctive leap of faith the old Jedi would have called mastery of the living Force. His training after that is nothing like what the old Order would have called proper. Scattered lessons from Yoda on Dagobah, cut short by war, interrupted by his own impatience to save his friends before he's ready. He faces Vader directly at Cloud City and loses badly, loses a hand, loses the fight completely. And it's there, in defeat, that he learns the single most devastating fact in the entire 25,000-year history of this story. Darth Vader is his father. And here's where we finally arrive at the actual thesis of everything we've been building since Tython. The Jedi believed in balance, that light and dark both belong, that the goal is staying centered between them, forever, without resolution. The Jedi were born by rejecting that idea completely, deciding darkness wasn't a counterweight to manage, but a threat to refuse outright. Fall to it once, by their own standard, and you're lost. Luke believes something new: redemption. The idea that someone who has fallen, however far, however completely, can still be brought back. That the connection isn't severed just because a person chose darkness once, or many times, or for years. Nobody before him tested that idea to its absolute limit. Luke's version is different. He believes it without proof, and he's willing to bet his life on it. He gets that chance in the throne room of the second Death Star, standing before both his father and the Emperor. Sidious wants him to strike Vader down in anger, to complete his own fall the exact way every Sith apprentice before him has fallen, through hatred, through rage, through exactly the kind of emotional collapse that turned Anakin into Vader in the first place. Luke refuses. He throws his lightsaber away, disarms himself completely in front of the 2 most dangerous Force users in the galaxy, and simply says he is a Jedi, like his father before him. Sidious, furious that his plan isn't working, turns his lightning on Luke directly, torturing him while Vader stands beside his own master and watches his son suffer for the crime of refusing to kill him. And the moment that everything since Tython has in its own way been building toward. Vader, watching his son being tortured rather than fight back, does something that every rule the Sith have ever operated by says should be impossible. He turns. He picks up the Emperor he's served faithfully for over 20 years and throws him down a reactor shaft, sacrificing himself in the process, taking a fatal dose of the same lightning meant for his son. Luke pulls his father's mask off in the last moments of his life, and for just a few seconds looks at the face of a man named Anakin Skywalker instead of Darth Vader, before that man dies having chosen, finally, to be his son's father instead of the Emperor's servant. Ironically, the Chosen One prophecy was fulfilled only after Anakin helped bring both orders to the brink. The Jedi were nearly wiped out, the Sith destroyed themselves, and with Darth Sidious and Darth Vader both gone, balance was finally restored to the Force. After the war ends, Luke rebuilds the Order from absolute scratch. One man trying to pass on what little he understands of what the Jedi were supposed to be, training a new generation that includes his own nephew, Ben Solo. It's the closest thing in 25,000 years to what the very first Jedi pilgrims did when 8 Thoyor ships first called them down onto Tython. That's the actual shape of this whole story, if you step back far enough to see the whole thing at once. Balance, tried for 10,000 years until it broke under pressure. Refusal tried for another 15,000, powerful enough to survive Sith Empires and rule of twos, and a purge that should have ended everything, but rigid enough that it couldn't save its own most gifted son when he needed saving most. And then redemption, the idea nobody quite had the nerve to fully commit to, until one young man with an incomplete education and a missing hand decided to bet everything on it anyway. 25,000 years of Jedi and Sith, of masters and apprentices, of wars fought over exactly what darkness means and what to do about it. And in the end, it wasn't a stronger warrior or a wiser council that finally answered the question. It was a farm boy from Tatooine refusing to give up on his father, becoming, in every sense that actually matters, the last Jedi and the first one of something new all at once.